The sky hasn't been clean since the surge. It hangs low, not quite gray, not quite yellow, just a thick, sullen smear that settles over everything like damp ash. You can't see stars anymore. Even the sun, when it burns through, is filtered into a dull, sickly orange that makes your stomach churn if you look too long. The clouds don't move like they used to. They pulse, they shimmer sometimes. Some say that's the mindworms moving through the airwaves, twisting the weather to their needs. Others think it's just leftover radiation from the firestorms. Either way, no one stares up for long. What's left of the world isn't much. The cities were the first to fall, dense, proud, layered like onions, civilization peeled back by collapse, by panic, by infestation. The high-rises in the downtown core melted into skeletons when the temperatures hit 50 Celsius and stayed there for weeks. Steel warped, asphalt blistered. People boiled in their apartments when the grid went down and never came back. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed by the black mold storms that followed drotting spores thick as wool, carried on winds, too warm for winter, too dry for spring. Out in the countryside, things fared no better. Once fertile fields became crackling wastelands. Rivers bled dry, then coughed up strange things, moss-covered deer with twisted limbs, fish that blinked like human eyes, frogs that didn't stop screaming. Forests burned, then regrew overnight in knotted, fungal tangles. No one dared walk through. They said the mindworms liked the rot. They said the rot whispered back. And in the midst of it all, we, what's left of us, hung on by fingernails and prayer. The government fractured into silence months ago. There were no last speeches, no final broadcasts, just a slow fading of presence. First, the power stations died. Then the net collapsed. Then the emergency alerts stopped pinging altogether. Some say the last stronghold was out east, buried in the Rockies, where the air was still thin and cold enough to keep the mindworms from breeding. But it's just a rumor passed between crackling radios and graffiti tags. No one's confirmed. No one's come back. What we have now are factions. Some call themselves sanctuaries, but they're just old shopping malls, fortified with scrap and cruelty. Others are road crews nomadic scavengers who strip towns for copper, tools, anything, still useful. You can tell them by their trucks, covered in rusted plates, symbols painted in blood or oil. They don't talk much. They just watch you pass and decide whether you're worth the bullets. And then there's scattered survivors with more memory than future. Some of us broadcast, like me. Others dig, scrape, patch wounds, share water, barter stories like gold. We form loose collectives when we can, trading safety for supplies, companionship for silence. But trust is thin. Everyone remembers the first outbreaks. Everyone remembers how fast it happened. The mindworms aren't literal worms. Not always. Not at first. They started in the rain, or so they said. Spores carried on vapor trails, modified by some long-forgotten experiment in weather control or climate bioengineering. The details are a blur. All we know now is that they get inside the skin, through the lungs, through the ears, if you're unlucky. Once in, they unravel your thoughts, feed on memory, rewrite who you are. You stop recognizing people. You forget your name. Then you forget language. Then you scream, constantly, until something tears loose in your throat, gurgling, wet, and endless. No one's safe from them. Not even the air is clean. That's why we travel, masked, layered in scraps and scavenged hazmat. It's why we boil water until it evaporates to nothing and still refuse to drink it. Familiar. Places aren't familiar anymore. Cities like Chicago, London, Karachi, just names now. You find signs half buried in dune dirt, spray painted over with warnings. Nitrogen monoxide light after dark. The noise is not wind. If you hear them inside your skull, run. I passed through a town last week where the church bells still rang. Every hour except there was no one there to ring them. Just the sound echoing across empty fields, like some echo of a schedule that no longer mattered. The air smells like mildew and rust and something faintly sweet like decayed fruit. It clings to everything, seeps into your clothes, your gear. You dream of it. Some say the mindworms don't need to infect you physically anymore, that they've started living in signals, in sound. That's why we build Faraday cages around our radios, why we turn the dials slowly, why silence is sometimes safer than song. The world as we knew it is gone, not changed, not broken, gone. But somehow something keeps going. Pockets of people, glimpses of gardens hidden under tarp and soot. Children who've never known anything but this wasteland and still manage to laugh when the rains don't burn. It's not hope, not exactly, more like momentum, a stubborn refusal to stop. And me, I keep the broadcast going. Maybe someone's listening, maybe not. But in a world that forgets everything, even your name, the sound of a voice might still mean something. Even if it's only the echo, even if it's only static. I'm not a hero, never was. My name is Layla Rahman, and I'm the one you hear when you tune that battered AM dial in the middle of the night. I run this little station from what was once a weather-beaten roadside diner on Highway 23 back then. I served coffee and half-burnt pies to travelers chasing cross-country dreams. Now I pedal the generator, patch up the transmitter with scavenged circuit boards, and broadcast hope however thin the signal across the wasteland. I survived because I learned how to listen first. When the Mindworm Outbreak began, I was still working the graveyard shift behind that chipped counter. No one in the kitchen knew how to handle the storm of panic that swept through our small town when the news first broke. Mental collapses, people raving in the streets, crowds fleeing into the fields, only to lie down and scream themselves into silence. I saddened. I learned each night. When the power grid flickered and died, I kept the diner's old radio on my hip. I tapped into every shortwave I could find, emergency nets, ham operators, crackling CB chatter. Some voices were calm, offering coordinates and water caches. Others were broken, just static punctuated by agonized shrieks. It took me days to filter signal from noise, to know whose voice was worth following. Then I found the mechanic's shop outside town, where a handful of survivors had built a rainwater still. From there, I mapped routes, shared tips on building makeshift respirators, warned callers about a raider convoy scouting the old toll bridge. When they came for the diner, 24 armed men in patchwork, uniforms I broadcast every warning I could muster. By the time the mob arrived, the faithful had slipped away under cover of darkness. I stayed to protect a few jars of dehydrated sugar, half a tank of diesel, and the station's stack of printed maps. When they smashed the windows, I climbed through the back and ran into the night, radio swinging, purse full of rice and stolen seeds. Since then, I've been on the move, but always circling back. This diner-turned-broadcast-hub is the only place I've found with a roof that hasn't collapsed, with enough scavenged glass to keep the generator's enclosure intact. Every morning I check for patches of green sprouts in the parking lot, moss on the walls, any sign that the world might heal itself. Then I pedal the crank until the lamp flickers on, fire up the transmitter, and speak into the void. I am driven by duty, by the knowledge that someone may be someone alone in a rusted sedan, or someone huddled in a flooded subway tunnel well. Hear my voice and know they are not entirely forgotten. I've learned that hope isn't a thing you find. It's a thing you give, one broadcast at a time. But hope doesn't pay for diesel. I have routines, dawn patrol for trash heaps, where I sort through scorched cans and snapped circuit boards. At midday, I scout the ruined outskirts of what used to be Dubois City, half buried under drifting dunes, looking for intact solar panels or broken radios. I trade canned meat for water at a survivor camp 2 miles west, where they grow bitter. Squash in a greenhouse, sealed with old plastic sheeting. At dusk, I return to the diner, patch my wounds, and refill my journal with notes, frequencies to test, safe routes through the mold fields, warnings about the next rainstorm I've seen, more death than I ever cared to count. My closest friend, Jocks, died of exposure when a cold front rolled in out of nowhere. He was a rail yard worker with a grin that made you think sunlight had a soul. We tried to keep the station alive together. He tinkered with the old transmission, coils. I ran the mic. When the worst of the mindworm hits come, they twist your blood too fast for your heart to follow body temperature spikes, then plunges. He collapsed in the booth one night, and I found him cold on the floor at dawn. I held him as he slipped away, and his last word was my call sign. Since then, I've carried him in my pockets, a scrap of his t-shirt, a coil of wire from his belt, the echo of his laughter when I screw up the tuning. Some nights I swear I hear his voice riding the static, telling me I'm doing all right. I lost my family before the outbreak, when the storms hit wildfires, igniting with no rhyme, then weeks of unceasing rain that turned towns to quagmires. My parents thought it safe to flee south. They never made it past the desert crossings. I found their camper burned out in the sand dunes, doors ajar, trays of dried pasta scattered like breadcrumbs to nowhere. There was no one to bury, just a charred frame and the bones of our old life. I stayed because somewhere in those ruins was the transmitter they built together as ham radio hobbyists back in the day. If nothing else, I'd honor their work. Every sorrow I've carried has taught me a survival hack, how to filter tainted water with charcoal and cloth, how to jury-rig a hand-crank charger from a bicycle wheel, how to hide from raiders in a basement full of mold until the footprints drift back above you. I keep a list of these lessons in the margins of my journal, labeled with the name of the person who taught me Jox's voltage fix, Harper's water still, Reyes's mask. But my greatest lesson came from the mindworms themselves. I thought they were medical. I thought they were viral. I never imagined they could hijack thought. When I first felt them crawling in my skull a tickle at the corners of memory, I panicked. I thought the cracks in my mind were the end. But I discovered something else, that the worms respond to sound. That if you feed them frequencies of comfort lullabies, bird calls, gentle static, they settle, become quieter, give you a window. That's how I manage. I broadcast music between the news and the weather, odd recordings of church hymns, the creak of a swing set in an abandoned playground. It keeps them at bay. The work is lonely. The rusted diner with its shattered booths is my fortress and my prison. My only daily visitor is a stray dog with one eye who pads in when I open the door, wags its tail, and lies in the corner until I fill a bowl with water. I call him Signal because he always comes when I call. He listens at the door while I broadcast, sometimes whimpering when the mindworm notices a wrong note. Some days I almost give up. The nights grow colder now. The storms are back. Rain that flakes your skin. Thunder that sounds like falling buildings. I watch the sky pulse, and I think about lying down in a field, letting the worms sing me to sleep. But then I imagine someone, somewhere, tuning in and hearing, "This is Layla, still on air." And I pedal the crank another hour, send out my frequency map across 800 miles of wasteland, and speak into the static. Stay alive, stay human. The signal is still here, because I know that even in a world that's forgotten how to dream, a single voice can remind us that we once did, and maybe, just maybe, we can learn to dream again. They call it the red tide noun, endless wave of superheated air rolling down from the north, sweeping across the plains and into the mountains, igniting everything in its path. It began 6 months ago, just after the acid rains receded, and has grown more vicious with every sunrise. Temperatures hover near 60 degrees Celsius by midday, then plummet to below freezing at night, fracturing steel rails and human bones alike. No weather model predicted this. No government bulletin warned us. It simply arrived, and with it, the mindworms proliferated. I first noticed the change when my sweat evaporated before it hit the ground, leaving my clothes bone dry and my tongue thick with salt. The diner's generator began to overheat. Circuit breakers tripped on their own. The puddles outside, once teeming with moldy-toned insects, vanished into shimmering mirages that hovered above cracked asphalt. My transmitter sputtered with static, so sharp it felt like glass slicing my eardrums, and all across the radio spectrum. I kept hearing the same terrified message in broken bursts. They're coming with the heat. They love the sun. The red tide isn't a single storm. It's a moving front, hotter than any natural heat wave, capable of spawning fire whirlwinds that lift scorched debris high into the air. One such whirlwind tore through the survivor camp west of Dubois City, burning tents like tinder, swallowing shacks and greenhouses whole. I arrived at dawn to find the remains, charred frames, melted plastic, and a single scorched transistor radio still faintly calling for help. The survivors who escaped spoke of infernos that glowed without flame, heat so intense it sawed through. Steel support beams. They carried burns that never healed, skin sloughed like bark, and lungs so scorched they sounded like sandpaper when they breathed. In this world, water has become a myth again. Wells that once tapped aquifers are empty. Rivers evaporated under the relentless sun. I keep a map of functioning water sources. 3 springs dot the foothills. A borehole 200 kilometers east. A cache of rainwater barrels hidden beneath a collapsed petrol station. Each source is contested. Raiders ambush convoys. Open. Fire on anyone carrying jerry cans. Sanctuaries hoard water. Dip tanks only when the moon is full. Refusing to share unless you bring bullets or blood. When I broadcast instructions on distilling water, how to build a solar still using plastic, sheeting and black-painted metal eye get cursing responses. Too slow. We need liters, not dribbles. But I keep repeating it, because boiling water over a small reflector is all the difference between cholera and just choking on rust. Last month, I recorded the measurements. A square meter of plastic angled at 45 degrees over a shallow pan yields nearly a liter every sun cycle. It's science, but in a world where people die for a teaspoon, it's a lifeline. Diesel is gone. Gasoline is a legend. A single canister, if you can find it, trades for an entire cache of canned beans. I managed to siphon enough diesel from a derelict farm tractor to run the generator for 2 weeks. Then it sputtered out, and I spent 3 days walking 15 kilometers to the black market oasis, trading a memory card of old radio programs. They gave me 5 liters of methanol blend, nothing close to diesel, but enough to keep my lamp flickering in the darkness. The cost, my encryption software, my stash of spare valves, and a vial of Jox's blood kept as a medicine by the Oasis doctor who claimed it had antiviral proteins. I traded it without hesitation. Memories, my memories are worthless. When it's your throat that's searing open, food is another barter item. The greenhouses that once promised salvation collapsed under acid rain and heat. The beans for centuries from seed vaults shriveled in transit. Now tins of Spam and powdered eggs are all that's left. I cook 1/2 spoon of egg powder per liter of boiled water to bulk up a small ration. I've watched children pick through the remains of old-school cafeterias for crumbs of crusted bread. Birds pick clean the bones. I see them digging through ash, hoping for scraps size hollow, bellies flat, skin stretched tight like old drums. I met a group calling themselves the Ember Guard outside the broken highway tunnel last week. They were well armed, uniforms patched. From firefighters' turnout gear, helmets lined with reflective tape, they claimed to be securing fuel convoys, distributing water rations to Allied survivors. Their leader commander, Aminus, spoke with conviction, voice amplified by a megaphone. I believed her, passed her my scanned routes, my supply locations. But 2 days later, they ambushed a column I guided to spring number 2. I watched the radio crackle with gunfire and screams before the line died. When I confronted Amina, she said, "Survival isn't charity. We protect what's ours." She offered me a single liter of water in exchange for silence. I refused. We haven't heard from each other since. Then there's Dr. Reyes. Hold. Up in the broken remains of a university lab 200 kilometers north. She's one of the few left with functioning microscopes. She's identified mindworm larvae in rainwater samples. She told me the worms thrive in ultra-low humidity and high UV indices conditions the red tide delivers in spades. But they also mutate under gamma radiation leftover fallout from last decade's nuclear meltdown. In lab reports, she sent over-scrambled radio bursts. She theorized that if we could replicate the worm's sensory aversion to frequencies below 300 Hertz, we might keep them at bay in clusters. In practice, that means setting up low-frequency sound barriers, giant speakers, playing deep drones around camps. Nobody's had the parts or the time to build such systems yet, but the idea gives me a sliver of hope that the tide might turn. Every day brings new horrors. Yesterday, a dust storm swept through fine silver ash that clings to lungs and metal alike. It singed my eyelashes and clogged the workings of my transmitter. I spent 3 hours digging through pocketed vents, clearing circuit contacts with a toothbrush and vinegar. At night, my hands trembled from acid exposure. It took me 10 hours to rebuild the antenna mast using bamboo rods stolen from an old botanical garden. By the time the signal returned, half the survivors on my frequency had moved on or died. Supply lines fracture faster than you can map them. I once believed if I could chart every trading post, water spring, raider blockade, I could navigate safely. Now the routes shift daily. What remains of society is a patchwork of micro-states and outlaw camps. Infrastructure is dead. Hospitals are makeshift tents, overflowing with patients suffering from dehydration, burns, parasitic infections, and now the worms. The last official census pegged the population at 8% of pre-collapse numbers. Unofficial estimates put it closer to 5. Entire regions are uninhabitable. The rimlands, where acid rains wash heavy metals into the soil. The glass desert, where sand fused into obsidian fields under repeated heat shocks. The flooded barrens, where melted glaciers have drowned coastal plains, leaving concrete skeletons jutting from the water. Trees that once held our voices aloft are now charred stumps. Wildlife is either mutated or extinct. I found a doe with 2 heads, tangled antlers, stumbling beside a dried creek. I couldn't bring myself to shoot it. I watched it starve instead. At dawn, its single remaining doe-eyed child licked its mother's empty teat. Day, night, delta. Expect swings of up to 80 degrees Celsius between noon and 3 a.m. Metal fatigue from thermal expansion, contraction, means structures collapse without warning. Always inspect supports for warping before sheltering. Heat, mitigation, whitewash tents with kaolin clay slurry to reflect solar radiation. Create shaded corridors by suspending tarps on bamboo. Frames 2 meters above ground to allow airflow. Solar stills, a 1 square meter sheet of UV-resistant plastic over a shallow basin yields approximately 0.8 L-day. Use charred wood charcoal in pre-filter to remove heavy metals. Add crushed limestone or eggshells until pH reaches 7. Test with improvised litmus paper red cabbage extract. Let sit 24 hours before distilling. Frequency barriers. Generate sub 300 Hertz. Base drones using car alternators modulated by bicycle-driven inverters. Position speakers 50 meters apart around perimeter. When tested in lab, Worm larvae retreat beyond 20 centimeters from speaker face. Panel yield, salvaged 50 W panels in direct sunlight deliver. 1 kilowatt hour over 8 hours. Combine 2 panels in series to charge 12 volts batteries. Diesel alternatives, methanol blended 25/75 with water, can run small generators at 40% efficiency. Add 0.5 g of baking soda per liter to neutralize acidity. I sit here in the diners, cramped control room, notes scattered across the table, the generators hum trembling through my boots. Outside, the red glow of the approaching red tide creeps down the highway. I can taste the heat in my throat, feel my pulse quicken with the promise of another night of fights to come against the elements, against the worms, against the predators, who call this world their own. This is the crisis. Not a single storm, not a single enemy. It's the stacked dice of climate catastrophe, biological weapons gone rogue, fractured humanity scraping for scraps. It's the knowledge that every fix I broadcast could save lives. Zor mark me as a target for those who profit from suffering. But I will not stop, because every day survival gets harder is another day I have to try. And maybe, just maybe, if we pool our fractures, share our formulae, patch our wounds and our radios together, we stand a chance of holding the line. This is Layla Ramon, broadcasting from Diner Station Delta. The red tide is coming. If you can hear this, gather your people, batten down your shelters, and run your frequencies on 297 kilohertz. I'll be here, cracking open the night with words until the sky goes silent or until the worms drown in our noise. Stay alive, stay human, keep the signal strong. I woke before dawn, the cracked window of the diner rattling with tremors from the red tide's advance. Inside, the generator hummed low, barely enough to keep the lights from flickering an ominous whisper that tonight's fuel reserves were nearly gone. I pressed my palm against the cold steel of the crank handle and closed my eyes. My mouth tasted of dust and stale coffee. I knew exactly how many liters of methanol I had left. 1.7, 16 hours of broadcast, maybe 12 if the storms turned violent again. Water was my first worry. The solar, still in back, yielded just under a liter a day, but between Jox's old coffee filter and the tarps patched from survivors' tents, evaporation losses meant I netted closer to 800 milliliters. I rationed that for drinking, cooking, and here's the cruelest twist wound, cleaning. Last night, when I tripped on a loose floorboard, I gashed my calf. The cut bled blackish-green fluid. The ash in the wound burned like acid. I soaked a rag in water, mixed with crushed charcoal, and wound it tight. I'll change it again tonight. If I have enough water left. Food was slightly easier. Powdered eggs and rationed Spam lasted longer, but each can opened was a promise broken. I grated dried kelp into my spoonfuls of egg porridge, hoping the iodine would stave off cramps. But the kelp came from a single subterranean grow bed I discovered in an old marine biology center. No more than 100 grams of powder left. After that, the cold ocean would be the end of edible seaweeds. I hadn't the parts to power the lights needed for indoor algae vats, not to mention the bulldozed dunes that blocked the lab's fuel was the linchpin. Without it, without the transmitter, hope flickered out. I'd scavenged 3 jerry cans of methanol blend from a raider ambush, last week paid for with Jox's blood and half my maps of the eastern wells. Now I had enough for 2 more nights of broadcast, maybe 1 if I cut down to hourly message loops. Not yet. At dawn's first glow, I slipped outside in my scavenger's gear extra layers, tight scarves, goggles. The world was already too bright. I wore the goggles more to protect against the ashless winds than the sun. Down the highway, I saw the Ember Guard convoy, 5 armored pickups, tires wrapped in scrap metal chains, black smoke curling from their stacked exhausts. They patrolled like vultures, scanning every wrecked vehicle, every hiding place, every sign of life. When they passed, I crept to the roadside, where someone had hung a battered sign, safe passage to spring to, stop at Bluegate. The sign was fresh, the paint still glossy under the grime. I pressed my palm to the wood and felt a tremor of hope. I recognized the handwriting, a looping, cautious script that belonged to Ellen Moreno, a botanist turned hydro-engineer who taught me how to neutralize acid rain. Ellen had disappeared 3 weeks ago. If she's alive, that sign could mean she's still at spring number 2, working on the low-frequency barriers Dr. Reyes mentioned. I risked stepping into the highway. 1 misstep, 1 rattling shell casing underfoot, and the guard might notice. I pressed my back to the cold glass of an abandoned diner window. No response. The signal was too weak this far out. I might be shouting into the wind, but I committed the coordinates to memory. If the Ember Guard hadn't claimed the spring outright, I could still try. Word reached me about something else. A buried vault beneath the old metro station in what used to be Dubois City. They called it the Whispering Vault. Rumor said it was an emergency seed bank stocked with fungi and bacterial cultures designed to restore soils after chemical fallout. More tantalizing, there was talk of archived frequency modulators, sound-driven, climate-controlled prototypes that could clear acidic smog and lower ambient heat by disrupting solar absorption in particulate layers. Science fiction, of course, but if a single prototype worked, if someone could rig it to pulse at scale, it might reverse the red tide, at least in pockets. 3 survivors told me about it last night in coded bursts of static. A cartographer named Omar, a demolitions expert named Claudette, and a child no older than 10 called Echo because she could mimic any sound she heard. Omar sketched a half-legible map of subway tunnels. Claudette warned of collapsed passages and unstable columns. Echo hummed a frequency 36 hertz that made my teeth vibrate. She said that's the key to the vault door. No voltage, no physical lock, just a resonance seal. When the note hits true, hidden mechanisms click open. I burn. Through the rest of the morning pacing the diner's back room. Should I abandon my post? Without the diner's tower, I can't broadcast. Without broadcast, others won't know the vault exists. If the Ember Guard gets there first, they'll weaponize the tech or destroy it to keep the world dependent on them. A trap, a myth born of desperation. Trust is a currency rarer than water. Every alliance I've made has come with a hidden ledger. When Dr. Reyes shared her lab data, I traded signal maps. When Ember Guard's commander Amina approached me, I handed her safe route, coordinates only, to watch my own convoy ambush. I stare at the map Omar drew blotched lines beneath a dark square labeled vault. My finger traces the route, 6 kilometers southwest, then 2 levels down. The surface passage is littered with twisted rail cars and half-buried statues of politicians, their faces leached by acid. Beyond that, the tunnel roof has collapsed in places. The air inside tastes of rot and ozone. Mindworm hotspots have been reported in narrow shafts where the worms feed on radio echoes bouncing off metal walls. It's madness. Yet the faint promise of a seed bank and a climate-controlled prototype is the brightest glimmer I've had in weeks. Late afternoon, the old CB crackled. A voice I recognized, deep, steady, tinged with tired humor cut through the static. Station Delta. This is Raven's Wing. I've heard your call. I know the way to the vault. Raven's Wing. That was the code name for a former subway engineer, rumored to have keycard access codes to several stations. She vanished when the lines closed. No one had heard from her in months. If she's real, she could guide me past collapsed sections, through radiation pockets, around fungal growths that devour flesh. If she's not, I might be walking into an ambush. I replied. This is Layla. I'm listening. Her response, a singular, tone-low, mournful, 12 hertz, followed by words. She said she'd meet me at the overpass ruins at midnight. She'd bring 2 instruments, an old key locker override, and a set of heavy-duty sound emitters. She claimed her group had scavenged enough power cells to light the vault's resonance seal, break it open, and haul out whatever lay inside. But her voice cracked. We need the broadcast. Once we know we're not alone, we'll move. I sat with that promise, watching daylight bleed away. The diner windows, stained crimson by the red tide, offered no comfort. I realized enough. Every person alive is chasing salvation, be it water, tech, or a myth. Some will lie, some will kill, and a rare few like jocks, like Ellen, maybe like Raven's Wing will risk everything for the greater good. I check my gear. 2 days worth of water, tablets for neutralizing acid, extra filters, enough dehydrated eggs for 3, a roll of titanium wire, 4 sound emitter modules, scavenged from old car stereos, rigged to bicycle dynamos, a rusted-out AK-47 with 3 working magazines, and my radio, the one lifeline connecting me to the world. I could stay. Fortify. The diner. Ration the last of my fuel for emergency broadcasts. Maybe trade with the oasis. That's safety relative. Safety. But the world outside shrinks every day. The Ember Guard tightens its noose. The red tide encroaches. The mindworms learn new patterns. If I stay silent here, the vault will open without MIF. It opens at all end. I will remain anchored to the same table, listening to the generator wheeze, its last, or I can go. Trust Raven's Wing. Omar's map echoes frequency. Descend into the belly of the city. Gamble Jox's soldering iron and my own thin smile against the chance that some buried hope still sleeps underground. I breathe in the dust-choked air and grip the radio mic. My voice comes out steady, even eager. This is Layla Rahman, broadcasting live. If you're near the overpass ruins north side, beneath the collapsed flyover, listen for the bass. Hum at midnight. We move for the whispering vault. Supplies, intel, volunteers. Bring everything you have. We make our stand. We get answers. Stay alive. I end transmission. Silence. The generator groans. Outside, the wind picks up. I close my eyes and picture Jox's grin, Ellen's calm certainty, Dr. Reyes peering through a microscope at larvae slinking away from low-frequency drones. I open my eyes and feel something stir a faint thrill, like the first chord of a song I thought I'd forgotten. The rising tide of crises still surges around me. Raiders will patrol. Fungal storms will sap my strength. The worms will test the barriers. But for the first time in weeks, I feel resolve harden in my chest. We move at midnight, because even in a world of lies and dust and scorching heat, a promise can be more powerful than a storm. And sometimes, hope is the only weapon left worth brandishing. Midnight arrived on hushed feet beneath the overpass ruins. The world outside had gone, still except for the low thunder of the red tide's far-off rumble, like an angry beast pacing just beyond sight. I stood beneath the broken concrete pillars, the air thick with ash motes that glowed under my headlamp. Raven's wing emerged from the shadows, her silhouette angular and wary, flanked by Omar and Echo. Behind them, half a dozen figures clutched, flashlights, axes, and scavenged weapons. I clicked on my sound emitters, 12 hertz, just as Echo had hummed. The units pulsed once, twice, then let loose a deep, vibratory drone. The ground beneath us hummed in sympathy. The ruins shivered. Now, Raven whispered. She pressed her override key against a section of metal Facadian old service door sunk into the collapsed wall. At first, nothing happened. Then the drone seemed to answer, resonating through. The mechanism, a click, echoed. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a dark corridor sloping downward. We entered in single file, boots crunching on debris. The corridor walls dripped acid-etched stalactites. Steam hissed from cracks where subterranean heat met cooler air. The drone continued, a low pulse that warded off the faint skittering in the corner's mindworm larvae. Recoiling from the frequency, at the end of the tunnel, a heavy blast door stood sealed. Omar knelt beside the keypad. "It's a sound lock," he murmured. He placed his ear to the door and scowled. "We need more bass." Echo stepped forward, voice trembling. She let out the single note she'd learned odd, bird-like call. Pitched at 48 hertz, the walls vibrated. Across the vault door, 2 circular plates began to spin open, like eyes widening. The drone ratcheted up in volume, and the door swung inward. Inside lay a cavernous chamber, lit by rows of emergency. Luminescence flickering green-tinted tubes that hummed to life as we filed in. The air was cool, sharp with the Thames of ozone and preserved earth. At the center, a tiered array of steel containers glowed faintly. Seed vaults labeled fungi, grasses, legumes, experimental cultures. At the far wall, a raised platform held a squat machine intricate lattice of mirrors and speakers aimed at a prism-shaped crystal. The prototype, Raven breathed. A sonic solar reflector designed to scatter infrared, lower local temperatures. I stepped closer, heart pounding so hard I feared it might set off the acoustics. The crystal pulse charged as the emitters tracked its resonance. Above it, data screens flickered. Ambient temp, 62 degrees Celsius. Projected drop, 18 degrees Celsius. Duration, 12 hours. This could buy time, I whispered. Keep storms from spawning fire whirls for a day. To my voice cracked. We need to broadcast this. Claudette, the explosives expert, knelt at a console. We can seal the vents, power up the reflectors, and send the signal, but we need fuel cells. At least 10. I only have 6. I looked at Raven, the Oasis Trade post-methanol stores. 2 days walk. She met my gaze, eyes hard. We can't. The Ember Guard patrols the corridor halfway there. We'll be ambushed. Outside the vault, a low tremor shook the floor. The luminescence cracked, then went dark. We were plunged into a humming blackness, lit only by the glow of the crystals and our headlamps. The drone cut out Teko's note, stuttering and dying. A second tremor, harder. The tunnel entrance collapsed with a deafening roar. Dust flew. Echo screamed. Claudette cursed. We're sealed in, Omar said, voice hollow. Panic rippled. I heard the wet rasp of larvae moving through vents. We were trapped with the worm's higher humidity here. Cooler pockets, ideal breeding grounds. Raven's wing drew her blade. Get to the vault containers. Seal them. We hold this chamber or we die. We scrambled to the seed vault. Files tumbled. From shelves, packets of golden barley, vials of mycorrhizal spores, small canisters marked Mindworm antagonist strain A12. Jox's voice echoed in my skull. Science is hope. I tore open the A12 canister. A bitter, chalky smell filled the air. Claudette mixed the spores into a powered feeder, rigging it to the crystal's cooling system. This should kill larvae on contact, she muttered. She dumped half the canister into a drip tray at the base of the machine. The crystal pulsed brighter. The reflectors clicked into alignment. I sprinted for the console, adrenaline flooding me. My fingers flew over the keys. Broadcast protocol, Raven shouted. On it, I panted. I keyed the mic. Layla Rahman, Diner Station Deltiath. Anyone hears this, the Whispering Vault is secured. We have seeds. We have tech. We have the means to cool the skies. If we can get power cells, the worm's screeches cut the transmission. Somewhere deep, a portal cracked. The drone crashed out. Darkness and shrieks, then the hiss of dissolving flesh. The vault floor quaked. Vials toppled. I fought to keep the console upright. A shrill keening filled the chamber. Echo huddled against. The slabs began to sing a lullaby from before the collapse. Her voice was fragile, but the worms recoiled. Centimeters, the chamber fell silent. The hum of the crystal was the only sound. The reflectors shone like twin suns inside the vault. I pressed a hand to my chest. Relief hit me like ice then, a new dread. We've killed the larvae, I said, but we still need fuel cells. Raven looked at me. We can use the crystal's energy output to charge the emitter's bypass, the methanol, entirely. I realized she was right. The reflector's surplus could be diverted, but only one sand, only for a limited time. If we rerouted power, we'd expend the prototypes, stored charge, and lose long-term cooling. But we'd broadcast the breakthrough to every surviving camp and maybe spark manufacturing. I weighed the options. Save fuel cells, BROADCAST, indefinitely, but risk Emberguard intercepting the vault later and using it as a weapon. Divert crystal power, send out a one-time pulse, ignite global awareness, then watch the vault darken and the worms re-emerge. Raven placed a hand on my shoulder. We do what you think is right. My mind flashed to dying camps, 2 children choking on dust. I thought of Jox's grin of Ellen's steady hands, of Dr. Reyes's microscope slides. Science is hope. Hope is worth a single sacrifice. I set the consoles rooting. Divert, now. Omar and Claudette worked the switches. Echo sang louder. The vault's hum rose. The crystal's light flared so bright I had to shield my eyes. I keyed the mic one last time. All stations, all survivors, this is Layla Rahman. We have the seeds to regrow the world. We have the means to cool the skies, to fight the mindworms, to reclaim our home. Search your camps, gather your instruments, build these reflectors. We send you the designs now download on 297 kilohertz. Rise up, rebuild, resist the silence. The signal lives. We are not defeated. The vault shook, the light stuttered, the reflectors ground to a halt. The crystal's glow dimmed like a dying ember. We watched in the flickering green luminescence as the machine powered down, its final act complete. The vault door groaned open. A cold breeze swept in from the tunnel's prelude to the red tide's return. We stood in the aftermath of our choice, hearts pounding, lungs burning with the first breath of hope we'd tasted in months. I looked at Raven's wing. We did it, she nodded, voice raw. Now we run. As we retraced our steps upward, I felt something shift inside me. The weight of every lost jock's, my parents, the endless scars pressed into my chest, but alongside it came a fierce warmth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was the spark. When I emerged into the night, the sky glowed with the red tide's distant fury. But somewhere beyond, thousands of radios crackled to life, humming with schematics, with seed vault coordinates, with the low, steady drone of resistance. I raised my mic to call Diner Station Delta back on air. My fingers trembled as I dialed. The frequency, I whispered into the static. This is Layla Rahman. The signal rises from the ashes. Stay alive. Stay human. We broadcast our future. And with those words, I stepped into the storm, no longer alone, but at the center of something far greater than any one of us. The turning of the tide, the morning after the vault's sacrifice. I woke to silence so profound it felt unreal. The generator at the diner was cold. The methanol gauge sat stubbornly on empty, but when I keyed the mic, waiting for static, I heard instead a low, steady drone, the resonance patterns of survivor-built reflectors coming online in scattered pockets hundreds of kilometers away. The red tide beyond the windows still glowed, blood red against the horizon, but here, in this narrow valley, the air held a slight edge of cooler promise that our one-time pulse had rippled through the sky and fractured the heat wave's advance. I stepped outside, boots crunching on ash, and breathed deep. For the first time in weeks, exhaust smoke and acrid dust mingled with something else. The fresh temps of fungal spores drifting from the vault's vents, hovering low over the road like mist. Those spores carried the A12 strain, lethal to mindworm larvae. If even a fraction found its way to the surface, the worms would struggle to spread. Their populations fractured. That meant fewer mind-scrambled casualties, fewer towns lost to silent, screaming infections. Hope. But hope doesn't feed you, and it doesn't fix broken bones. I pressed a hand to my calf, where the old wound had flared with infection during our descent. The rag held steady no, fresh bleeding, but the skin underneath looked puckered and gray. I needed clean water and antibiotics soon, or the wound would rot me from the inside out. I limped back into the diner's cramped control room where the others had gathered. Raven's Wing stood by the shuttered window, eyes scanning the skyline. Omar was hunched over the console, decoding inbound messages. Echo drifted between them, humming the lullaby that had saved our lives. Claudette inspected her toolkit, frowning. At the empty battery rack, "How many calls?" I asked, voice hoarse from disuse. Omar looked up, relief in his eyes. "Half a dozen camps report clear skies and cooler nights. 3 have deployed makeshift reflectors. 1 says the worms retreated, didn't dare cross their sound barrier." Raven nodded grimly. "It's a start, but it's not safe yet. Ember Guard patrols are increasing. They'll want the vault tech for themselves." I sank onto a stool, fatigue weighing me down. We gave them the entire design. It's out there now, in every broadcast loop. They can't steal what everyone already knows. That realization seemed to buoy Raven. Then we move. We take the vault's seeds, share them with the Oasis grow beds, the greenhouse projects. We rebuild. We scavenged collapsible solar panels from nearby rooftops to charge radios. We used A12 spores to treat the surrounding soil. Small patches of moss and lichen reappeared. On concrete, a green promise in the gray. Echo's song became our lullaby between Sagessa, reminder that sound could heal as well as ward off the worms. I patched my wound with a course of crushed aspirin and charcoal, rationing water carefully. Each morning I broadcast updates, coordinates of new reflector installations, diagrams for seed planting circuits, warnings about raider movements. I spoke to children hiding in subway tunnels, to farmers eking out crops beneath damaged solar. Arrays, 2 itinerant medics testing the A12 on larvae they harvested from fallen carcasses. I even received a greeting from Dr. Reyes, her voice crackling. Preliminary data shows a 60% drop in larval counts around reflective zones. Keep the frequencies low. Repeat the lullaby pattern, it strengthens the effect. That night, I drifted into a fevered sleep, haunted by memories, Jox's final laugh, my parents' camper van, the shriek of a friend consumed by worms. I woke, choking on sweat, heart pounding. The line between survivor and casualty felt razor thin. One misstep, one wrong breath of air, and the mindworms would reclaim me. But when I checked the console, I saw something new, an incoming transmission. From Ember Guard HQ, my chest seized. They'd picked up our designs. They'd mobilized. 2 days later, at dawn's first light, Ember Guard fighters stormed the diner. I heard the roar of engine-armored pickups crushing debris under heavy tires. My heart sank. We had no defenses, only our will and a handful of sound emitters wired to jerry-rigged batteries. Raven's Wing barred the door. Omar and Claudette scrambled to get the broadcast back on air. Echo pressed against my side, small and trembling. Outside, gunshots echoed metal, hitting metal, shouts in rasping voices. I keyed the mic one-handed. "This is Layla Rahman. All survivors code red. Raider convoy approaching. Deploy reflectors on the North Ridge and hold position. Frequency, shift to 312 Hertz, static answered. Then a chorus of radio replies, armed farmers, tunnel dwellers, a convoy led by Dr. Reyes herself, bristling with solar-charged weapons. Through a smashed window, I saw pickets of Ember Guard troops advancing. Their leader commander, Amina, strode forward, rifle raised. She barked into a megaphone. Broadcast ends now. Hand over your equipment and technology. We will rebuild the world our way. My blood ran cold. But before I could respond, the reflectors atop the diner's roof activated low, throbbing hums that rippled out like invisible walls. The Ember Guard fighters faltered, staggered, collars clamped to their ears. The worms within them writhed, triggered by resonance they couldn't control. Some collapsed, crumpling to the ground. Others dropped their weapons, clutching throats. Eyes wild, Commander Amina cursed, staggering toward the door. I had a choice: keep broadcasting and risk. In the days that followed, the Ember Guard's grip crumbled. Survivor cells reclaimed their territories. New alliances formed under the banner of shared knowledge, reflectors, seeds, lullaby, frequencies. The oasis grow beds swelled with sprouting. Legumes, tunnels, and rooftop farms bristled with young shoots of barley. The air around pockets of active reflectors felt cooler just by a few degrees, but enough that the sky's hue returned to a dusty gray instead of ominous red. I returned to the diner one evening as dusk settled. The generator hummed quietly. On solar power, no methanol needed. I sat at the counter, spooning kelp-spiced porridge, watching Echo chase a stray kitten through the dining area. Claudette and Omar tinkered with a new emitter design. Raven poured water from a solar still into a row of jars, checking pH with red cabbage strips. Beyond the dusty windows, I could hear distant laughter, a sound I thought I'd forgotten. Yet, inside me, something had shifted too. The weight of losses of jocks, my parents, my own near-death moments, felt tempered by something I'd feared irretrievable: purpose. My broadcasts were no longer desperate pleas for survival. They were blueprints for rebuilding. My voice crackled with confidence, even warmth, and the world responded. Across the wasteland, survivors sent back messages. First harvest in 3 weeks, found a spring pH neutral. Children singing your lullaby as they sleep. Even Dr. Reyes reported progress. Spore-driven soil treatment is working. Mindworm colonies collapsing in treated zones. The land around the diner showed early signs of change. Where the spores had settled, mold mats turned from sickly yellow to lush gray-green. Cracked earth split along new fissures, and tiny shoots of grass poked through. The red tide still raged beyond, but it was no longer a monolith. It fractured around our zones, diverted by cooled air currents and reflective barriers. Yet this was not a return to the old world. The sky would not recover its blue. The storms would not cease their acid tears entirely. Nature reconfigured itself around the new normals. Mycelial networks replacing grasslands. Subterranean fungi stabilizing dunes. Engineered bacteria eating heavy metals in the soil. The world was healing, but into something different. Something